most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
All the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. An obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, December 2nd, 2024, the 1412th day of dystopia. I am your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. What a weekend of big kind of fake news. And we're gonna get into a bunch of that. We're gonna do the Joe Biden, quote unquote, pardon of Hunter Biden. We're gonna do the nomination of Kash Patel. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about how the fake government is kind of being wound back to the constitutional era, if not before. The false reality layer and the constitutional republic base layer are becoming more distinct, and cover stories are developing to make up for that difference. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about something that we discussed on Saturday evening's Devolution Power Hour on the Badlands Network. And I want to start with this post right here from Elon Musk on Saturday morning. This is a response from Elon to an account called Mostly Peaceful Memes, who says, kind of wild that Joe Biden is still president and people have already forgotten about him. Elon Musk says he was never really in charge. How about that? The number one recipient of Defense Department contracts, according to one Kash Patel. On Fox News, he said it on Gutfeld's show a few years ago. The number one recipient of Defense Department contracts. Now, is Kash Patel telling the truth there? Is it something that you can support through documentation online? No, probably not. But you have to kind of accept the inference, which is that Elon Musk has all of these Defense Department linked companies that he is said to own. SpaceX, Starlink, Twitter. You have to guess the Boring Company. You have to guess Tesla. So really all of Elon Musk's companies are Defense Department linked in some sort of way. And Twitter was Defense Department linked. All of these should be assumed to be DARPA technologies, or maybe even technologies that have been around for a lot longer, certainly than Elon, maybe than DARPA. So the number one recipient of Defense Department contracts is saying about the man who people claim to be commander-in-chief, the man we're told won the 2020 election with 81 million real lawful American votes, who was then properly certified and inaugurated and has served for the last nearly 4 years now as president. 4 years minus 50 days. We are 50 days until inauguration. So the number one recipient of Defense Department contracts is saying about the commander-in-chief that he was never actually in charge, never really in charge in the first place. We've talked for years now about Elon Musk's direct defiance of the Biden administration agenda, as it were. The idea being, of course, that there is a Biden administration and that it is legitimate and that it is pursuing an agenda. To the extent that all of that is true, Elon Musk was clearly countering it at certain points or failing to go along with it at certain points, particularly in Ukraine. And that would be a crazy thing to do for the number one recipient of Defense Department contracts with a real legitimate president. That would be absolutely insane. So on Saturday of this, this past weekend, what was that? November 30th, Elon Musk says he was never really in charge. And then Elon Musk followed that up as some conversation spun off that post. He followed it up within the hour, responding to another post. And sorry, I don't know why the top of this post is cut off. I can't remember who this post was from. I suppose it doesn't matter. It is a picture of Donald Trump from the night before at Mar-a-Lago. You see in the foreground Dave McCormick and presumably his wife. You see Doug Burgum and presumably his wife. You see, I believe that's Mike Waltz back there on Trump's left. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada and Fidel Castro's son, to his right. And that, I believe, is Howard Lutnick to the right of Trudeau. I don't know who this couple is on the far left side. So to that picture, Elon Musk responds, he is the de facto president at this point, that being Donald Trump. Okay. So Joe Biden, we're told, was president, properly received 81 million real lawful American votes, was properly certified, was properly inaugurated, and has served for a number of years, nearly 4 years, as president of the United States of America. But Elon Musk now says he was never really in charge. In response to a post about no one actually believing Joe Biden is president. And very few people at this point probably do see Joe Biden as president. Amusingly, the way we got to that point was by Joe Biden being unduly removed after being nominated by the Democrat Party as the presidential candidate in this fake election. Joe Biden clearly won the Democrat primaries by a very, very wide margin, would have been the nominee. And then he was just simply removed and replaced with Kamala, the similarly fake and illegitimate vice president. And at that point, people basically began pretending that Kamala was the president of the United States of America. Kamala was never president. They tried to stage all sorts of events where Kamala could look presidential. They made it seem like she was handling hurricanes, traveling to disaster zones. These were all elements of her fake campaign, trying to make it look like she was in control of things, that she was already doing the job of president and therefore could be trusted to continue doing that job. Tried to show her popular and authoritative, as though she was expressing some sort of legitimate power when in fact she was expressing no legitimate power. At no point was Joe Biden a legitimate president of the United States of America, certainly not on the base layer. Whether or not he was functioning as the face with a title of president on that false reality layer of our government is, I guess, something that we can see in the future. I would be crazy not to leave the possibility that I am wrong about that. But to the extent that he is a legitimate president and will be remembered as such throughout history, I think is becoming more and more obviously unlikely. I've said in every episode of this podcast for well over 4 years, Joe Biden will never be president. Joe Biden has never been president. And now the number one recipient of Defense Department contracts, presumably under the command and control of the commander-in-chief, Joe Biden, is agreeing with the position of this podcast for well over 4 years that Joe Biden will never be president and has therefore never been president. So I don't know. Am I right or am I crazy? For years, my hair's crazy. For years, people have thought I was crazy. There are probably people who listen to my podcast and are like, that's an interesting point of view. And then get to the end and I say, Joe Biden will never be president. And they're like, oh, that's a bridge too far. Can't get on board with this. And I'm fine to weed people like that out. I don't miss their listenership. It's going to be just fine. The point of this podcast is saying the things that I know to be true as soon as I can possibly detect them to be true or likely true or possibly true. You know, we project out into the future because that's the point. We're trying to erase a gap along an informational timeline. And you can't do that by following the pace of regime-oriented media in the mainstream. And to the extent that the based and red-pilled influencers throughout social media and throughout Con Inc. media at the Daily Weimar and Dan Bongino and Tucker Carlson and the rest of them, maybe they're running an information operation, or maybe they're just keeping their audience years behind real time on an informational timeline. And maybe there are grave consequences to be suffered by their audience while people defend them, claiming that they're waking up the normies. I don't know. I could be wrong, but it seems like it's that. And to the extent that we're trying to alleviate that problem and provide at least some outlet, along with Badlands, of course, that's trying to catch up to real time on that informational timeline so that people are not misled into decisions with terrible consequences, like injecting themselves with a toxic experimental gene therapy that cannot protect them from a disease that cannot kill them. That's not something I want my audience to do. And a number of other people were perfectly happy to have their audiences do that, only to then later say, whoops, I guess we were wrong. We were wrong, gang. Sorry, I trusted the experts. My wife's a doctor. Okay. So Elon Musk says that Joe Biden has never really been president, which puts him in an interesting position relative to pardoning his son, Hunter Biden, does it not? How does a fake president perform a presidential pardon? Well, if you're a fake president and all of this is simply a story, of course it is, then it's not hard at all to pardon your son. What could be easier than pardoning your son as a fake president? There are literally no consequences except narratively and in the public perception. So, will the public perception shift in our direction as a result of this presidential pardon or not? I would suggest that the public sentiment is going to shift strongly in our direction as a result of the fake president filing a fake pardon for a fake conviction after the commission of fake crimes. Now, did Hunter Biden violate laws that are on the books? And to the extent that other people are punished for those crimes, should Hunter Biden be punished for those crimes? And, you know, we can say yes to those things, but being late on your taxes, tax crimes, and filling out improper information on a gun purchase or registration form, gun crimes, those aren't crimes and should not be crimes. And when people aren't prosecuted for those crimes or aren't found guilty for those crimes or are pardoned for the commission of those crimes, we should approve of that in my mind. Okay? The right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. The amount of bullshit that governments make the people go through in order to own and purchase firearms is an infringement on their right to bear arms. All of that is null and void. And no one should be going to prison for any of those reasons. Okay? And, Hunter Biden obviously didn't make it to prison. To the extent that anybody else is in prison for similar reasons, they should be let out of prison. They should not be in prison. This is, I think, a bigger priority by far than people who are in prison for drug crimes. And I don't think anybody should be in prison for using drugs or possessing drugs. The selling of drugs and bringing those into communities, probably in coordination with cartels, probably in coordination with intelligence organizations. I'm fine with that being a crime. Okay. But somebody who is in jail for possessing drugs or for doing drugs, I don't think they should be in jail. I'm not suggesting that we should necessarily legalize all drugs, though maybe we should. And I'm not suggesting that people should do drugs or that we should be creating a culture where people are more inclined to do drugs, though that's everyone's personal choice. Okay. I'm only saying that people shouldn't be in prison for doing drugs or possessing drugs. And even that is, I think imprisonment over those things is probably more legitimate than being imprisoned for not filling out government forms properly when those forms themselves are already an infringement on the Second Amendment. And because it is explicit in the Bill of Rights, one would think that that is a major violation. And I do think that. And we're going to maybe get to kind of some of the theory on some of these federal crimes. I mean, imagine empowering a federal government to prosecute the people for exercising their own constitutional rights in the law or in the spirit and the letter of the Constitution. They're going to present false information on a government form that shouldn't, according to the Constitution, exist. And that's going to be a crime that we want to empower our federal government to enforce. I would say strong no on that. Same thing about going after citizens for income taxes, federal income taxes. Preposterous. Anyway, so maybe we'll get into some of that later when we discuss Kash Patel, because I posted yesterday on Truth Social and Telegram, and we'll come back to it. But I said, I think, ask not what Kash Patel will do with, or who he'll prosecute with the DOJ and the FBI. Ask how quickly they'll be abolished. That's what should happen. The DOJ and the FBI should not exist. And we should go, and we will go through, hopefully, if we have some time, some of the impetus for their creation, which I would argue was were particularly and specifically and explicitly parts of a usurpation of a government of, by, and for the people. Each act in itself was part of that usurpation. The Department of Justice was created just after the Constitution was ratified. The Constitution itself was a replacement for the Articles of Confederation that some parties deemed to be too weak to form a federal government with proper powers. The Articles of Confederation could only be amended with the ratification of 13 states, and the Constitution was then put in to replace the Articles of Confederation, requiring only the ratification of 9 states. How about that? Strange, isn't it? And so after that point, when the Constitution was put in, against the wishes of many of the people who are founders of this nation, the anti-federalists as they're called, and then they were called Jeffersonians, but people who did not want to empower this massive sprawling federal government that now we have today. They could see obviously down the line. That was the intent by the people who promoted that centralization of power and federalism, Alexander Hamilton and whatnot, doing business on behalf of global banking. Or maybe they were just cucked to global banking, and maybe global banking simply had too much power and they had to, I guess, surrender in that way. So, we weren't alive then. It's not like I'm trying to condemn people in particular, at least not in this instance. But there's something weird that happened there. We can at least admit that. And if they forced through the ratification of the Constitution, going just over the Articles of Confederation and the government that was in place, they were initially supposed to have the convention to revise the Articles of Confederation. And instead, they just decided to throw the whole thing out. That is a strange process. And to then push through ratification, through what the people wrote at the time, the anti-federalists wrote at the time, was some measure of coercion, and then not stop there. You get the ratification, the Constitution's done, and then immediately you put in the Judiciary Act of 1789 and then revise that a few times to create the Department of Justice and to create the federal court system, which immediately overrode the desire for jury trials only and began instituting this entire system of bar law, of British common law in the country after that point. And then after the Reconstruction, to initiate the FBI. Okay. So you go through the Civil War era. We talked many times. I guess we're not going to talk about this later. I guess we're going to talk about it right now, and then we'll get into the part. But we've talked many times about George P. Fletcher's book, Our Secret Constitution. George P. Fletcher, the Columbia Law School professor. Okay. Very, very regime, very communist. He is a leftist. He is a statist. He is a Zionist. They brought in this form of law. He says specifically in the book, in no uncertain terms, that Abraham Lincoln, you know what? Hold for processing. Let me see if I can actually find this. I think that I probably excerpted this on Telegram. Okay, hold, please. So, Fletcher describes Lincoln as like the greatest president ever. Let me just pull up one of his quotes right here. He thinks Lincoln is like the most important person in American history because he was able to initiate the second Constitution. And again, he's not shy about saying this. Here is one of the quotes about Lincoln from Our Secret Constitution. The slaves whom Harriet Tubman led to freedom in the North called her Moses. Abraham Lincoln readily saw himself in the image of Moses, leading his people out of bondage into the realm of freedom. Wow. Okay. Abraham Lincoln is Moses. But Fletcher also says this. Parker's and Lincoln's commitment to popular democracy represents a clean break with the limited forms of indirect democracy recognized under the Philadelphia document drafted in 1787. According to the elitist Republican scheme envisioned at the founding, the only institution that would be popularly elected would be the House of Representatives. And that body would be chosen by the group that was qualified to elect, quote, the most numerous branch of the state legislature, end quote. 2 delegates to the Senate would be elected by each state legislature. The president was and still is to be elected by an electoral college chosen by the voters in each state. The original Constitution was silent not only about who was entitled to be a citizen, but also on the questions of whether only citizens and which citizens should be entitled to vote. All this was left to state law, and the states generally limited the franchise to white male adult citizens who owned the requisite amount of property. The word democracy is not even mentioned in either the Constitution of 1787 or the Bill of Rights. Okay, let's get to some more. I think I have, oh man. Apologies. I think I might not have this. Let me see if I can find this. I'm not sure if I saved that page and posted it. And if I didn't, of course, it'll be very hard to find that exact. Man, I'm really blowing it here. It's one of those times you have a whole show all lined up, or mostly lined up. And then here, this one's going to be a great one. I can't believe I haven't gone through these at some point. Maybe that's my oversight in how much I talk about this. I probably should have maybe brought it up before. Man, some of this is so good. Sorry for the hold for processing time. I know this is terrible for the people who are listening to the audio, but hopefully it'll be well worth it. Okay. So I think we're going to get the picture here through these next couple of slides. And if we don't, well, you are welcome to revolt against my podcast. So just to flesh this out, there's no doubt that the nations whose struggles I described, France, Germany, and the United States, think of themselves as Christian nations. Yet the very idea of redemption of the entire nation through law resonates more with the older tradition of the Jewish national mission. The Jewish national mission under the Torah revealed at Mount Sinai. My account seeks to unite the divergent strains of all religions that trace their roots to the original idea in Exodus of a nation living under God and under law. So you can hear some of his perspective on that right there. Let's go forward here. Fletcher says in the book, the Gettysburg Address, understood as the preamble to a new constitutional order, underscores four values that stand in radical relief to the motivating concerns of the Constitution as it stood with the Bill of Rights in 1791. In outline form, these are the constitutional structures. And he goes through the dates. The source of authority is we the people in the Revolutionary Constitution, in what Fletcher calls the Civil War Constitution, as you can see right there on your page or on your screen. Not making this up. The nation as defined by history. That's the source of authority. The nation as defined by history. The primary value for the Revolutionary Constitution is freedom, whereas it is equality. The Civil War Constitution, the mode of government, a republic versus democracy. And the highest power, the will of the living. The highest powers, the command of history, and the divine mission. Okay, that is living under the rule of law. And Fletcher refers many times to the Torah, as you just heard earlier, making it about Moses to appeal to Christians, living under the rule of law as defined by history. So, I mean, again, I think that I have represented the case this book makes very faithfully to what he actually presents here. And I would completely disagree with Fletcher in every way. I think Fletcher's a lunatic, globalist, and global communist. But the only point is whether or not I am representing him properly. You still have to represent him properly, no matter how bad he is. The truth is, he's happy to represent himself this poorly in our eyes. He says the new Congress takes as a given many of the provisions of the original Constitution. The new order inherits an operating Congress, executive, and judiciary. They would be recast in new functions, but the forms remain the same. The argument then is that the three Reconstruction Amendments enacted a second American Constitution. The terms of this Constitution, as called from the amendments, with some rearrangements and leaving out historically specific clauses can be stated in a few words. Again, he's presenting the Second American Constitution. This is his words. And again, the book is called Our Secret Constitution. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Section 2, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. 3, no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Section 4, no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Section 5, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Okay? So all of that is acceptable. the slavery or involuntary servitude is acceptable as punishment for a crime. Okay. So the Reconstruction Amendments enacted a Second American Constitution. His words, not mine. And one more. And then we can wrap it up with Fletcher. He says, well, this picks up in half of the sentence, talking about granting a constitutional authority in the final clause of the new amendments. Quote, the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of these articles. A more powerful central government was a critical part of the new constitutional order. This would be a government that would raise income taxes, as it started to do during the war. This government would enact welfare legislation to care for the widows and orphans of the war. Isn't that sweet? They created welfare to care for the widows and orphans of the war. And then they just kept it in place. And most important, it would be a government that would have the capacity to supervise private relationships. The Constitution was no longer focused just on the individual struggling to secure his freedom against the government. The government would have an active role in protecting and securing the autonomy of its citizens, As my rewriting of the 13th Amendment would have it, securing and protecting the autonomy of labor would become the duty of all state power. Government would have to keep a vigilant watch on all labor transactions to ensure that there never again would arise relationships bordering on slavery or involuntary servitude. So we're talking about a government that is involved in personal to business transactions and relationships and private relationships because of the equal treatment clause of the 14th Amendment. They had to be able to monitor and adjudicate everything that happens to make sure that there was no unequal treatment anywhere. And that was the argument behind setting up the FBI after the Reconstruction. So they replaced the Constitution to create a more powerful central government for the second time. The first Constitution was a centralization of power from the Articles of Confederation. And you can ask any AI or do any search and find out what was the justification for the new Constitution. Well, the federal government in the Articles was too weak, so they needed a more powerful central government. So they replaced the Articles of Confederation. They didn't bother amending it. They just went ahead and replaced it with the Constitution, a centralization of power. Then 80 years later, they did it again. Then in the 1930s, after having brought in the income tax, after having sold the country out once more with the Federal Reserve, they go ahead and in that World War II, that pre-World War II, post-Depression and World War II period, they continue selling the country off to the central banks and doing the service of the central banks. They were brought into World War I by the Balfour Declaration to assist in achieving the proper outcome of the war so that the mandate in Palestine could be pushed forward. The League of Nations, then the United Nations forming in World War II. The U.S. was also brought in to World War II for the same reason, to set up Israel in Palestine, and to defeat the Zionist partners, the Nazis in Germany. That's why it really happened. And then here we are 80 years after that, having once more either a total centralization of government or the decentralization of that government. We also might be looking at something disguised as decentralization that is in fact a further centralization, and that's what we have to be absolutely watchful for. But we're talking about the DOJ and the FBI being set up. It is clear that both of them were set up to further centralize the government after the regime elements in our government had subdued the anti-regime elements in our government. It's pretty crazy. So the point being, should American citizens be prosecuted for being late on their taxes, not paying their taxes, and improperly filling out gun purchase and registration forms? I would suggest no. And I would suggest that the abolishment of the DOJ and the FBI should be priorities and must happen within the next 4 years. So Cash is going to really have his work cut out for him. But let's focus on the Joe Biden pardon side of things. And I'm just going to peek at the chat for a second. Hold for processing. Ali Stussy with a Rumble rant, $10. Thank you. Thanks for your strong voice. Thank you, Ali. And okay, I think we're good. Doesn't seem like anybody's having a complete and total meltdown or anything. That's always a positive. Let's get to the pardon of one Hunter Biden. Pardon me. Hold for processing. Just putting this on screen so everyone can see it. Here is the pardon itself, the executive grant of clemency from Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, or so he claims. To all to whom these presents shall come, greeting, be it known that this day I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States, pursuant to my powers under Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution, have granted unto Robert Hunter Biden a full and unconditional pardon for those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through December 1st, 2024, including but not limited to all offenses charged or prosecuted, including any that have resulted in convictions by Special Counsel David C. Weiss in docket number blah, 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 in the U.S. District Court for the District of Delaware and docket blah, 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 in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. In testimony whereof I have hereunto signed my name and caused the pardon to be recorded with the Department of Justice, done at the city of Washington this first day of December in the year of our Lord, 2024, and of the independence of the United States, the 249th. Okay. So the 249th year of independence for the United States of America. That is interesting. We don't often see that sort of language. It is very, very interesting that Joe Biden is using it because that anniversary, as we discussed last week, goes back to the Declaration of Independence and not the ratification of this here Constitution. This suggests the revolutionary America and not the constitutional America. And normally we are convinced in our education and in our thinking not to make any distinguishment between those two. And I think perhaps the period where that is the proper approach may have expired. And I think that maybe we do need to understand the distinction between the revolutionary America of 1776 and the constitutional America of 1789 and beyond. And maybe I'm wrong about that. You know, I'm not some expert constitutional historian. I'm telling you what I see through the same framing I use to analyze everything else. And you can make your own judgments about how reliable I have been over the course of this 4-year period that I've consistently said Joe Biden will never be president. One of the only people, maybe the only person in this space to do that. And now Elon Musk is doing it, and he's the number one defense contractor. So you can judge for yourself how reliable I am. Maybe I'm just a crackpot who gets things right sometimes. Could be. Let's continue. This is Joe Biden's statement about the Hunter Biden pardon. Once again, fake president, fake pardon. People don't like hearing that sort of thing. They say, you can't say he's a fake president if he's submitting real pardons. Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying he's a fake president who is submitting fake pardons that are nonetheless being covered by the media. It's not difficult to understand. It's difficult to think something like that could happen unless you pay attention to everything else that happens. And then it's the most obvious thing ever. And we'll get to more of that, don't worry. Joe Biden, the so-called president, says, today, I signed a pardon for my son, Hunter. From the day I took office, I said I would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision-making, and I kept my word, even as I have watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted. Without aggravating factors like use in a crime, multiple purchases, or buying a weapon as a straw purchaser, people are almost never brought to trial on felony charges solely for how they filled out a gun form. That's good. Those who were late paying their taxes because of serious addictions but paid them back subsequently with interest and penalties are typically given non-criminal resolutions. It is clear that Hunter was treated differently. And again, that shouldn't be treated with criminal resolutions ever. So, totally okay. The charges, and by the way, it might be okay that Hunter was treated differently. He was also treated differently in regard to all the rest of the crimes, and we will get to that. But all that matters is he was treated differently here, and that happened for a political purpose. And again, I'm not defending Joe Biden. I'm not defending Hunter Biden. Joe Biden has led a career of political criminality, unless he has been some sort of secret agent for 50 years, okay? And small chance that something like that is possible, but we can at least be open to the possibility. However, unlikely. The charges in his case came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. That's very strange. Is he talking about Republicans in Congress like Jim Jordan and James Comer and Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley before them, who actually put out that Senate report in 2020 detailing the crimes on the Biden laptop, which they had in evidence since some point in 2019? We are told. Are those the opponents, or are there other opponents? Then a carefully negotiated plea deal agreed to by the Department of Justice unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. Had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases. And we can bristle at that statement. But again, we're talking about these two issues, not all the issues, these two issues. And, since these things shouldn't be crimes and shouldn't be prosecuted in a criminal fashion in the first place, maybe that deal would have been reasonable under those circumstances. No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son, and that is wrong. There's been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober, even in the face of unrelenting attacks and selective prosecution. In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough. For my entire career, I have followed a simple principle. Just tell the American people the truth. They'll be fair-minded. Here's the truth. I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected this process, and it led to a miscarriage of justice. And once I made this decision this weekend, there was no sense in delaying it further. I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision. And hey, man, I guess we shall see what happens in the future. Maybe Americans will come to agree that he has made the right decision, both as a father and as a president. So how is it possible that Joe Biden could have led a life of corruption and Hunter Biden could have been directly involved in that corruption, and that Joe Biden would be right in this pardoning? Well, we already have the basis that other people aren't prosecuted for this sort of thing, and these things should not be crimes. And we can be totally okay with both of those explanations. But that doesn't address the totality of the period, because Joe Biden is now submitting a blanket pardon for anything that Hunter did or may have been accused of doing from January 1st, 2014 to just yesterday, December 1st, 2024. So nearly 11 years of Hunter Biden's behavior is covered in this blanket pardon. That's a lot. Okay. So that's everything with Burisma, everything with the mayor of Moscow's wife, everything with China and those companies, and potentially anything that Joe Biden could have done. A lot of people are reading this as Joe Biden preemptively pardoning himself for crimes he was involved in as vice president of the United States. And those couple of years while he was both vice president and Hunter was dealing with Ukraine and other foreign interests. Okay. And it's always worth remembering that Hunter wasn't doing all of that alone. He wasn't, there were other politicians involved in some of these issues. Obama was involved in Ukrainian biolabs from 2005 with Richard Lugar. This is something that we have talked about before on this podcast, though probably not for years. Okay. There were other people involved in the biomedical research being done in Ukraine. I think it was the Pelosi's, John Kerry's wife's son. And then I think you've got Tag Romney. I think if memory serves, all right, we don't need to focus on that. The point is there are other politicians, major figures in the Uniparty involved in these crimes. So is it possible that Hunter Biden is a confidential informant or some such? Since the era of the Hunter Biden laptop, I believe that it is not only possible, but likely. And that's because, you know, while I think the Marco Polo Group has done outstanding research on absolutely everything in that laptop, I believe, though I don't think they say, although I don't know. I talked to Garrett about that. We've talked about it a couple of times. I had Garrett Ziegler on my show, I believe in the summer of 2023 or sometime before that. Worth checking that out. I think they've done excellent work. I have no doubt that it is the best possible research product that could have ever been delivered from that laptop. Okay. That's how confident I am in their work. But it's also possible that the Hunter Biden laptop, as it was delivered to them and to others, was simply a prepackaged Intel product, a la the Twitter files or the YouTube files or whatever other files we're going to see in the future about these issues. These are prepackaged intelligence products, which doesn't make them a limited hangout necessarily. It just means that there was so much information that it was already winnowed down for probably a number of reasons before it was delivered to the journalists or to the analysts like at Marco Polo in the Hunter Biden case, so that they could then deliver the stories of these issues to the American public. Okay. The Twitter files and that other stuff, that stuff was already known about. I don't think any of those journalists had to do any of that work, but you know, I'm open to being wrong about that in the future and them being more aligned with what the Marco Polo Group did in a much more mainstream oriented form. I guess we'll see. We haven't really seen much in the way of research. It was just a rehashing of a lot of the things we know and some further evidence to flesh those issues out in terms of the Twitter files. So did Hunter Biden turn the laptop in? Was that the intention? And then all of the kind of mechanics of how that operated would have been to create space between Hunter Biden, the confidential informant, or the guy who's turned state's evidence, rather than, you know, some guy who was just strung out on drugs and left his laptop there. All those mechanics would have been a cover story for the fact that he was working with the FBI or whoever to bring the truth of these issues out. Now, was Hunter Biden doing that to cover his own ass after committing real crimes? Totally possible. On behalf of himself and behalf of his father, and then created some sort of deal and then turned this information in. And everything that we're seeing right now, pardon and the rest of it, is just part of that story playing out to its conclusion so that there is a full, plausible cover story over whatever happened underneath. Totally possible. It's also possible that Hunter Biden had that status the entire time going in 2014. Okay. And maybe he was there to expose some of that stuff with his father. Hunter Biden has said before, he's on recording saying that Joe had to run for president and win in order to clear the family name or restore dignity. Let me see if I can find that really quickly. Was Hunter Biden ever recorded claiming Joe Biden had to become president to restore his reputation? Let's say it like that. We'll see if that works. Damn. Perplexity doesn't have it. All right. It only has people freaking out about the pardon. Sometimes with the AIs, I'll just say, answer my question. Don't interpret what I must have meant. There's no verified evidence or credible reports of Hunter Biden ever being recorded claiming Joe had to become president. That's wild to me. Okay. Well, I'll find that and substantiate that for you, because that is absolutely something that happened. Could Hunter have gone into all of those dealings with all of those other powerful political families, dynasties, children to record all of that stuff? Entirely possible. Okay. None of that explains Hunter Biden's drug use or the prostitutes or anything like that, unless it's part of some elaborate sting. Maybe it is. Okay. Maybe it is. Well, however small the likelihood, you don't want to rule things out and then bias yourself only in one direction in case you could be wrong about that thing. And then you won't have considered anything and you'll just find yourself wrong a lot. It's good to keep our minds open about these things because we can't possibly know the full truth. It's not accessible to us in very important ways. And so we should be mindful of that as we analyze these events. So Hunter is covered going all the way back to that. And is it a plausible interpretation that Joe would then be covered in that Joe is doing this to protect himself? Yeah. Okay. That's possible, but it's not the only thing. And here's another important wrinkle. So before we get to this, let's just backtrack. Fake president. Okay. Whatever the conviction was in the courts, we'll talk about that in a second, actually. If it's a fake crime, then the conviction can't possibly matter. Okay. It would be thrown out. And so the conviction is part of that cover story. And that's probably a regime cover story. It certainly seems to be now based on the reaction and the fact that Joe Biden did this, which suggests that Joe Biden could be our boy blue. Okay. If Hunter's plea deal or whatever Hunter's doing, if any problems, if any way they could have gone after Hunter, thereby gone after Joe, if Hunter and Joe have already flipped, is now off the table, then that is a significant shot against the regime, not for it. And I don't know that to be true. I'm just suggesting there are a number of ways to look at this. Could that conviction, could any of those future convictions have been overturned under those circumstances? Yes. Could the court just have been a total farce, a stage play? Yes. I mean, look at what happened in New York with the Juan Merchan and what was his name? Arthur Engeron cases, where Donald Trump would come out and address the press every day and tell the story. Law and Order, New York, the Donald Trump trials, the Get Trump effort extensively E. Jean Carroll, the fake business fraud, all of it. Just and obviously, Stormy Daniels and the hush money payments, quote unquote. The loudest hush money. That's what it was. Law and Order in New York, the loudest hush money. Those seem to be totally fake trials. How does something like that happen? I don't know. It's just something being broadcast to you ultimately and being reported on by fake news outlets. A lot of what we know about politics and American life could be of that variety, and we need to get there in terms of our understanding to be able to consider a lot of the stuff that we know to be happening, or that, at least that we are told is happening by that same narrative. So I am prepared for any level of fakery here. Okay. If you told me that all of our politics was only a soap opera on all sides, I would be like, yeah, that makes sense. I could believe that for sure. Who's going to contest that? The people? We could have no government whatsoever and only the show. And people would still grovel before that government. It's crazy. Let's get to some of the reaction on this. Actually, let's go first to this just for a bit more of the framing here on the technicalities of how this all will work. This is David Friedman on Twitter, but a bunch of people have made similar points. Friedman is U.S. ambassador to Israel under Trump. Okay. So again, take that as you will. It has also been claimed by Mike Davis of the Article 3 Project and his partner, Will Chamberlain, also of the Article 3 Project, a through and through DeSantis simp and cuck, and just a kind of pathetic moron, in my view, on X, formerly Twitter, and who knows, maybe it's all just a pro-Trump red team op. I don't think it is, but we shall see. David Friedman says, I'm not sure that Joe Biden has fully considered the ramifications of his pardon of Hunter. The pardon is extremely broad and covers activities while Joe was vice president. This means that Hunter cannot plead the fifth if asked about his business dealings with Ukraine and China, including his dad's involvement, because with his pardon, he has no risk of criminal jeopardy. So that's, I guess, how it works. If you are pardoned, then you can't plead the fifth. You can't, use the Fifth Amendment to not provide testimony that could be used against you, because nothing can be used against you. So you have to then provide the testimony. Now, I don't think any of that sort of legal framework would really hold up in a constitutional sense. None of that shit should be there. I don't know. That second level of law is, I think, where most of the problems are. And I would be inclined to have it completely removed in all cases. But that's just me. That's right now prejudice. I haven't obviously gone through all the permutations of a claim like that. It just seems like that is where the pattern shift is moving. So could this be interesting in the future? Hunter Biden now, quote unquote, pardoned. That means he has to testify about all of these things. Maybe that is actually worse for regime interests. And to the extent that it is, wonderful. Let's be happy about it. We don't need to lose our shit on the internet because Joe pardoned Hunter Biden and it's so unfair. I know it's unfair. It's not only a two-tiered system of justice, it is a system of justice that we are subjected to that is entirely created only to go after regime enemies and to provide plenty of room, legal and otherwise, to protect the people they want to protect. We should just understand it. The system was set up to be unfair. We can't beg the system to be fair. We have to understand that it was set up to be this way for reasons, okay? And then we don't expect the system to provide its own solution. It's not going to. So this was Joe Biden not too long ago with David Muir, who was one of the debate moderators.
Is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Okay. So that's all there is to it, right? Joe Biden said he would never do it. He would respect the court's decision. He would rule out a pardon. And now the real president has pardoned him. Now, we just talked a little bit about Jack Posobiec last week. He had an interesting post last night where he talked about whether or not Joe Biden had signed the pardon. You remember the issue about Joe Biden signing his statement where he dropped out of the presidential race. Did Joe Biden sign the pardon? It's an interesting thing to bring up. No matter how you feel about Poso, he's kind of closer to that, the feeding, what do they call it? The, I don't know. What do you call the water source? Like the lake that leads to the waterfall or to the creek, you know? He's closer to that for the information stream, the riverhead sometimes, than I am. So I have to at least think there's something going on that's being orchestrated by a higher level. I want to know why this statement in particular. And maybe that's calling out the illegitimacy of this pardon, the fakery involved in this entire narrative. So we should at least be mindful of that possibility. This is from the Never Trump neocon Lincoln Project. Hilarious. When MAGA cultists complain about a weaponized justice system, remind them that President Biden has refused to show favoritism toward his son because he has a commitment to the rule of law and our justice system, regardless of who is involved. And that was the Lincoln Project from June 6th of this year. Perfectly setting the fake president up to look like a fool later on and to make themselves look like fools later on. You gotta love it. You just gotta love it. What else do we have here? So Biden said he wouldn't pardon. He was hailed by various uniparty media figures, the Lincoln Project, John Harwood. There was a John Harwood tweet going around talking about how everyone was making themselves look like fools, even considering that Joe Biden might pardon Hunter. Joe was just not that kind of guy. And John Drake in the chat says, where in the Bill of Rights does it say you can't plead the fifth? And I guess you got it right there. I don't even think we need to get into that second level. You make a great point. I don't know how you can possibly legislate or even give away your rights guaranteed to everyone in the Constitution. The government can't just decide to take that away. And the Dark says, hi, Chris, $1 Rumble rant, and another one for 20. Chris, your analysis is so cutting that normie brains are likely to migraine. And I thank you for that. I don't know if I can make them have migraines, but one can hope. No, I'm kidding. I don't want them to be in pain in any way. I would just like them to be smarter than they are. And that, unfortunately, is impossible. So I guess we are screwed. They're just going to have to react how they react. I cannot control their reactions. I don't wish them undue pain. But if it is created by having to deal with irrefutable logic, then so be it. And I will let it be my pleasure to provide them with the opportunity. So Joe Biden had posted on X, formerly Twitter, on May 31st of 2024, no one is above the law. Elon Musk highlighted that and said community notes slays, referring to a community note on X, formerly Twitter, saying by pardoning his son Hunter, not merely for a single crime, but for all actual or potential crimes he may or may not have created over an 11-year period, Joe Biden has made clear that some people are, in fact, above the law. And this is one of the reasons that I don't particularly like community notes. I don't think we need a fact-checking feature on all of life. Although, I guess people love it. People think we need this. They need authoritative sources. Community notes represents an authoritative source, at least as a reflection of the democracy of belief, whether or not the notes are correct. So, this doesn't, there are certain potential instances where this does not make it clear that Hunter Biden or Joe Biden are above the law. Okay. So already the community note would be mistaken at that point. And that is a kind of subjective claim to begin with. So these sorts of notes, they're just not my thing. I don't think that this is a valuable addition to the public conversation. And hey, I don't get to make those decisions, And that is just how life works sometimes. John Dean. I'm going to go through this article in Huffington Post, which is ridiculous, but glorious in its ridiculousness. And let's start down at the end, just for a reminder here. Dean was once dubbed the master manipulator of the Watergate scandal by the FBI before ultimately turning on Nixon, setting the stage for his resignation from the presidency. So John Dean, former White House attorney, the Watergate figure, according to this article, and obviously all others, the man who helped bring down Nixon, a president, and then became Rachel Maddow's go-to legal authority on all Washington scandals. And how many a year do we have? This is the next Watergate. How many right now do we have that are the next Watergate? John Dean reveals Biden move that could doom Trump's revenge plot. Okay. This is John Dean on Blue Sky, also known as Pedo Sky. This is where all of the most deranged and militant communists have retreated. Biden should keep going with his pardons. Trump, Jack Smith and team, Mueller and team, and a blanket pardon for all on Trump's enemies list for any and all political statements before December 25th, 2024. Merry Christmas. Take the wind out of retribution and revenge. Isn't that incredible? How many would that be? Some took exception to Dean saying Trump should be among those pardoned. He replied that Trump will never be prosecuted anyway, and that Smith's report will take care of history. So Jack Smith's special counsel report will condemn Donald Trump in the annals of history, whether or not it condemns him in a criminal court and puts him behind bars. So narratively speaking, Howard Dean is already convinced that Donald Trump is going to go down as a criminal. And of course, this commie loves that quite a lot. He also added that the list to receive pardons, of those to receive pardons, should include everyone on the House January 6th committee, who Trump has said should be jailed, as well as former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and retired Army General Mark Milley, the former chair of the Joint Chiefs, whom Trump has accused of treasonous acts, as well as many others. Not everyone is on board with the idea, variations of which have been floated by others on social media. Former federal prosecutor Randall Eliason wrote, also on Blue Sky, so you can know kind of who he is. The problem with pardoning Smith and his team is that they have done nothing remotely criminal, suggesting even the possibility that they have by pardoning them would be a tremendous stain on their honor and reputations, despite the hell they may be facing. I'd bet they don't want it. Well, Randall, you are being awfully retarded by thinking that none of these people have actually committed crimes. I would think that to the extent any of it is real, Jack Smith and many of these other people would have committed grave crimes against America and its Constitution. They would have violated oaths, and they would have participated in the usurpation and coup of not only the Constitution, but of the country, the constitutional republic, through their anti-Trump actions and through their attempts to skew the public's perception and understanding leading up to a very real election in 2024. But of course, it's been an ongoing process for many, many years. So Keith Olbermann got Howard Dean's back here. I don't know if it was in response to Howard Dean in particular, or if Olbermann just had the same thought himself. But Olbermann is one of the most deranged lunatics in all of the American global communist, media, I guess you can say. He's not really, I don't think he has a show anymore. Maybe he does a podcast still. In the freak outosphere, Keith Olbermann is one of the greatest. Elon Musk posted Defiant L's post of Gunther Eagleman's response to Keith Olbermann's post, all on X, formerly Twitter. Olbermann said, "Pardon Hunter? Great. Now pardon everybody else. Every prosecutor, every Biden administration staffer, every media figure, everybody Trump will persecute. 10 million pardons at least." Olbermann is such a blowhard. Gunther Eagleman. I used to like Olbermann when I was a liberal back in it must have been 2008, 2009. He had his MSNBC show, and I don't know, he seemed like he was really taking it to all the bad guys in the George H.W. Bush, Dick Cheney, neocon sphere. And I hated neocons, and I think I was right to hate neocons. I was wrong to think that the controlled opposition of neocons were correct. And then once I came to hate that controlled opposition, I believe that, and this is like that 2017 to 2020 period. I was like, well, gosh, if these lunatics are wrong, and it seemed like, you can say, oh, it's the wokeness that's wrong. Like the center left is okay, but it's just the wokeness that's wrong. No, you realize that the center left is the same as the center right. This is all uniparty, but you just bounce back and forth. You're like, well, if these are the bad guys, then these must be the good guys because they seem to hate these bad guys. And that is not the way to go about things. Gunther Eagleman responded, "Are you admitting that there are over 10 million criminals in DC? Do you ever think before you post?" Well, the answer to that question is probably not. Although maybe he does. Maybe he just wants them all to have pardons. And he's okay with people knowing because they're going to know no matter what. And it's better if everyone's pardoned and protected in advance. 10 million? Even the people who talk about the sealed indictments, the sealed indictment count, I don't think that they even get up to 10 million. 10 million is an impressive number. By all means, if it's 10 million, game on. Pardon them all. I am not concerned about the status of a fake president's pardons. If they want to go ahead and give us 10 million targets, game on. Okay. If Joe Biden wants to put out those pardons and let us know who all these figures are, game on, bring it. I would love it. It would be like a cheat sheet for all of us, for truthers, for anons, for people who are looking for government accountability, even though they have no idea what's happening. It would be like a cheat sheet for all of these people. And I would absolutely adore that. Help me in any way you see fit. Our boy blue, Joe Biden. Somebody says I keep pausing in the feed. I hope that that's not true. Someone else says they keep having to catch up. Well, I hope we're doing okay here. I feel like the connection has been consistent while I've been using this office over the past couple of weeks. But if there is a problem, please do let me know. I'm not sure there's anything I can do about it right now, unfortunately, but it would be good to know. So let's continue with this here pardon. This is, and forget about the source. The source is irrelevant here. The facts are just compiled in one source. This is the Hindustan Times, just noting that former presidents, including Clinton and Trump, have also pardoned family members, stirring political controversy and scrutiny over the use of presidential power. Okay. Clinton pardoned his half-brother Roger, who had been convicted in 1985 for a drug-related offense. Roger served over a year in prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy charges. He faced scrutiny from congressional Republicans who investigated him for receiving large sums of money from foreign sources. And I think some of that is due to his actions in Haiti, if I'm not mistaken, though I haven't done a dive on Roger Clinton in quite a while. Billy Carter, the brother of Jimmy Carter, faced financial troubles and dealt with alcoholism. He tried to secure business deals with Libya, hoping to earn half the profits. While President Carter did not openly defend his brother, the pardon was granted to help lessen any political damage. Okay. And then Trump pardoned Jared Kushner's father. Now, Kushner, Trump just nominated Charles Kushner to be the ambassador to France. He also nominated Tiffany Trump's father-in-law. And of course, Charles Kushner is the father-in-law of Ivanka Trump. Ivanka is married to Jared Kushner. Trump pardoned Jared Kushner's father and has now appointed him as ambassador to France. Trump also did this. He appointed Tiffany Trump's father-in-law, Massad Boulos, to become the senior presidential advisor on Arab affairs. So he's going to be handling the Middle East. Massad is an accomplished lawyer and highly respected leader in the business world with extensive experience on the international scene, Trump wrote. He also wrote, he has been a longtime proponent of Republican and conservative values, an asset to my campaign, and was instrumental in building tremendous new coalitions with the Arab American community. Massad is a deal maker and an unwavering supporter of peace in the Middle East. He will be a strong advocate for the United States and its interests. I am pleased to have him on our team. Okay. So Massad was one of the guys who was helpful in getting the Arab community behind Donald Trump in Michigan, or so we're led to believe. And now he is going to assist the Trump administration in the Middle East. Charles Kushner, pardoned by Trump. He's going to be the ambassador to France. So we have both of Trump's daughters, their fathers-in-law are going to be part of Trump's incoming administration. How should we feel about that? People will call that nepotism, as they did with Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner led the negotiations for the Abraham Accords. Is that important in a what's the right way to say this? Is that important in a sovereign nationalist sense? Is it important in the emergence of a stable, multipolar world order? Yes, you could see it being a force for stability in the region, a force for the stability of the two-state solution that we can see is emerging despite the regime's total unwillingness to admit that, despite their denials and their claims to the opposite. The Palestinian state is recognized by Saudi Arabia, who's key to not only the Abraham Accords in particular, but kind of the enforcement of the sovereignty of the nations in the Middle East, the pushback against the global regime in the Middle East. And to the extent that Israel might be some sort of partner to that in the future, through the Abraham Accords, through the ultimate resolution with a two-state solution there, then Jared Kushner's work becomes very, very important. Now, could it all just be for global Zionism? People will make that argument. And is it possible? I guess it's possible. I think, again, it's an unlikely scenario, but I could just be looking at the thing with rose-colored glasses because I favor Donald Trump and I favor the emergence of the multipolar world order. It could map onto one reality or the other. I think it maps onto the one. And I guess I'm willing to go down with that ship because I think that that is correct. I also think that we are in much deeper shit if it's not correct. And so I want to at least outlast that opportunity before assuming the worst case scenario and then only reacting to that. I don't think the worst case scenario is justified at this point, although I'm willing to be wrong about that. I could be wrong about that. It might be worth more. I don't know if stress is the right word, but it might be worth, and I don't think panic is ever the right word, but it might be worth more, slightly more stress or panic than I am allowing for those possibilities. I guess we'll see. Okay. So we got those two Trump appointments. Then we have another interesting one over the weekend. Chad Chronister, a Florida sheriff who has been appointed the DEA administrator. Now, a lot of people were discussing how Chad Chronister in the COVID era was responsible for shutting down churches and whatnot. That's not good. There's some indication that he has been lenient on Black Lives Matter, that he has supported the woke agenda. We don't have to like all of Trump's appointments. We don't have to support all of Trump's appointments. We don't have to do anything, okay? Donald Trump doesn't need our help with his appointments. If there are good appointments that seem like they are not going to get through the Senate, for instance, and we'll come back to some of that, then we can put pressure on those senators. We don't have to lie about what we're finding out about the appointments, though. And there might be things that we're missing. So it's not that we just have to come down on these people and condemn them immediately, but we can critique them. We can find out what there is to know and then present it in an objective light and allow people to draw their own conclusions. That's what we should be doing. Somebody's got to actually vet this shit. Trump and his people might be vetting it, but we can't just assume that they've vetted everything properly and that we have no role. Trump said he was returning the United States government to the people. He was returning power back to you, the people. He said that with the military representatives behind him at his inauguration. Okay? If we're not willing to accept that power, then what's the point in him giving it to us? We would just be then turning and handing it back to the state, which is what a lot of people want to do by accepting the results of our elections, by just groveling and applauding for Elon Musk and all these other picks, whether or not their agencies should even exist. And I'm not coming down on all the picks. I'm just saying we're allowed to look at these things. We should be looking at these things. If we are going to be this kind of countrywide, open source intelligence apparatus that helps guide this government by informing the people and giving the people the information they need to help guide their government with a far reduced scope of what the government is actually able to do, this is how that's done. Okay? I just want to go to the end of this New York Times article. The DEA, an arm of the Justice Department, which again shouldn't exist. DEA shouldn't exist. So is Chad Chronister being appointed to an agency that shouldn't exist? Possibly. If that agency is then taken down, does it matter whether or not Chad Chronister is good or bad? Doesn't matter. So we don't know why these people are being elevated. We just know that they are being elevated. It is up to us to figure out what it is about these people that we need to know about and then figure out what to do with it. But let's continue. So the DEA said in its fiscal year 2025 budget request that 2023 was the highest year for fentanyl seizures since the agency's inception more than half a century ago. In addition, the agency confiscated more than 77 million fentanyl pills and nearly 12,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. The agency has more than 10,000 employees with offices in the U.S. and in more than 60 different countries. The DEA has offices in 60 different countries. What's it doing over there? Oh, it's waging the drug war? We've been waging the drug war for 40 years now. Why haven't we won? 60 different countries? An agency that shouldn't exist, part of our federal government, 60 different countries. It has a budget of more than $3 billion. $3 billion a year to not stop drugs. Now, again, I'm not trying to cast aspersions over everyone at DEA. I'm sure there are number of wonderful, honest, competent people there, okay, that nonetheless might be working for an unconstitutional agency that is a waste of money and that is doing something that it shouldn't be doing, enacting the global regime's agenda. 60 different countries is crazy. For comparison, Sheriff Cronister's department in Florida, one of the largest sheriff's offices in the state, has a 2024 budget of about $600 million and oversees more than 3,500 employees. Now, that is a big sheriff's department. $600 million? Crazy, man. It's crazy. I mean, it's better than the $3 billion being spent at DEA, because at least sheriffs, to the extent they are constitutional. Like, we should be supporting constitutional sheriffs. The states should be making criminal law, and the sheriffs, to the extent that anybody should be, and the sheriffs should be enforcing that law. These city police departments under these city corporations, crazy. Our system is so jacked up. It's unbelievable. Sheriff Cronister's father-in-law, Edward DeBartolo Jr., received a pardon from Mr. Trump in 2021. Mr. DeBartolo, a former owner of the NFL's San Francisco 49ers, pleaded guilty in 1998 to concealing an extortion plot. Though he avoided prison, he was fined $1 million and was suspended for a year by the NFL. That is kind of incredible. So another Trump pardon coming up with another father-in-law in one of Trump's appointments. That's kind of crazy. I don't know what to make of it. Okay. I'm not saying it's a bad thing and hints at corruption. It hints at something. And it might only be that Trump wants us to look into these people, that these are just people being spotlighted. Obviously, it could be way more than that. I cannot pretend to read the man's mind, but we can look at a little bit of this. Okay. So the corruption case of Edwin Edwards, former governor of Louisiana. So that's what that corruption charge stems from. DeBartolo pleaded guilty to a charge of failing to report a felony and received $1 million fine and 2 years of probation in return for his testimony. And then he was pardoned by Trump. So let me see. I just wanted to see if we could. DeBartolo developed shopping malls as part of a corporation founded by his father, one of the largest public real estate businesses in the United States, at one point controlling over 2 billion square feet of retail real estate space nationwide. Then they owned the 49ers during the Joe Montana, Bill Walsh, Steve Young era. Used to own the Pittsburgh Penguins, my very favorite hockey team. And okay, so we can leave the DeBartolo thing aside for now, though we may have to come back to it. But these are some interesting appointments with backstories on all. Where are we going next? Okay, so we did the appointments. Let's go here. We will marry one side of the conversation with the other, and we're going to go for about a half an hour more here. And if we don't get to things, then we will move some of them to tomorrow. But let's first go here. This is to my pal, the Anon, including to me. Pepe Lives Matter. He goes by UltraFrog17 on X, formerly Twitter. You don't actually think it's a coincidence that Biden pardoned Hunter less than 24 hours after Kash Patel was nominated for the FBI director, do you? Kash Patel told us in 2023, we caught them in Hunter and Joe Biden's criminal activities, and we will prosecute you if you broke the law. And he says Joe and Hunter must be petrified of the public knowing the truth about their dealings in Ukraine. This is why they must release all information possible. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And let's listen to Kash Patel.
whether they're in government, whether they're in the private sector, civilians, and yes, even if they're in the media, if they participated in a conspiracy to rig elections and break the law or do other corrupt activities, you'll be prosecuted. I think they're threatened because we caught them in Russiagate. We caught them with the 51 intel letter. We caught them on Jan 6. We're catching them in Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's criminal activities, and American citizens are tired of it. And they know they're in on it. That's what criminals fret the most.
Good evening. We are coming on the air with breaking news tonight. President Biden has made a decision to pardon his son Hunter ahead of the transfer of power to President-elect Donald Trump, according to a senior White House official with direct knowledge of the decision. He's expected to announce it later on tonight. And this comes months after Hunter Biden was convicted on gun charges back in June. That marked the first time a sitting president's child was convicted of a crime. Hunter Biden also pleaded guilty to federal tax charges in September. White House officials and President Biden himself have said repeatedly that he would not, in fact, pardon Hunter before leaving office.
All right. So a good post from him. Brought up Ukraine for a second. So let's tangent, but not too far. Jake Sullivan yesterday went on This Week on ABC to discuss Ukraine. Let's listen to just a couple of minutes of that.
Jake Sullivan. Jake, thank you very much for being here with us. I want to get to all that's happening around the world, but first I've got to ask you about the news Trump made overnight, appointing Kash Patel as the director of the FBI, or his intention to nominate him for that position. Patel listed you in one of his books as members of the executive branch deep state and one of the 60 corrupt actors of the First Order. Does this nomination concern you?
Well, I'm not going to speak to President-elect Trump's nominees. I'll let him and his transition team speak to that. I would just point out what the Biden administration did in approaching the question of the FBI director. As you know, FBI directors are appointed for 10-year terms, and the idea being that they extend beyond the term of any given president. And so we inherited an FBI director who actually had been appointed by President Trump, Director Chris Wray, who's continued to serve in that role through the 4 years of the Biden administration and served with distinction, served entirely insulated from politics or the partisan preferences of the current sitting president of the United States. This is a good, deep bipartisan tradition that President Biden adhered to. And that's really all I can say. As for me personally, I got 50 days left to continue to try to protect this country from threats, to continue to advance our national interest. I'm going to spend every day doing that and not worrying about other things.
But this is somebody who's talked about retribution, talked about the need, he suggests even prosecuting, saying that the Democrats, quote, should be very afraid. And again, named you as one of the corrupt actors of the First Order. So put aside the nomination to be FBI director. Does this kind of talk concern you about what's going to happen after January 20th?
Well, look, like I said, John, I can't worry about after January 20th. I have to worry about until January 20th and the full spectrum of challenges and opportunities the United States has to advance our national interest. I'm the National Security Advisor of the United States. My job is to try to protect this country, to try to reduce the capacity of our adversaries, increase the capacity of our allies. We got a lot of work to do. And frankly, we're going to try to do that also in a way where we have a smooth transition with the incoming Trump team. And I have to say that I've been gratified so far by the coordination I've been able to have with the incoming Trump team. They seem focused also on a smooth transition because they want to be able to hit the ground running. So that is going to preoccupy me between now and January 20th, nothing else.
Yeah, how is that working? Because on the one hand, you obviously have a lot on your plate. You just had the ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. You're trying to work out something in Gaza with Hamas. You've got obviously all that's happening in Ukraine. At the same time, Donald Trump is meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau. He's got calls with the Mexican president, other world leaders. How does this work? I mean, you don't have two presidents at once, but you've got world leaders trying to work with both an incoming and an outgoing president. How does that coordination work?
Well, transitions always have a little bit of awkwardness to them because you have an incoming team with a different policy than the outgoing team. And of course, leaders around the world have to begin adjusting to that. On the other hand, there is one president at a time. And that president is President Joe Biden, who in fact is leaving this evening on a foreign trip to Angola, who has just negotiated a ceasefire in Lebanon, who is working actively on a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, who met with Xi Jinping a week ago. And
so you only have one president at a time, and that's Joe Biden, according to Jake Sullivan, not according to Joe Biden's number one defense contractor. I want to skip ahead, though. Let's go here, and then we can leave Jake Sullivan behind. Okay, here we are.
Well, first, what I'm saying is we are going to do everything in our power for these 50 days to get Ukraine all the tools we possibly can to strengthen their position on the battlefield so that they'll be stronger at the negotiating table. And President Biden directed me to oversee a massive surge in the military equipment that we are delivering to Ukraine so that we have spent every dollar that Congress has appropriated to us by the time that President Biden leaves office. So that's first and foremost what we're focused on.
Their priority is to spend every dollar that Congress has appropriated to them by the time they leave office. They want to spend the money as fast as they possibly can, getting it out to all of their allies before leaving office, because Trump would then shut the spigot off and pull back that funding through rescission. And we're going to hear about the Impoundment Act and all of that, and they'll get very, very upset. But the American people just gave Donald Trump a sweeping public mandate, regardless of what the fake election results suggest. And a big part of that was not wanting to spend any more money in Ukraine. Jake Sullivan is telling us that the fake president, Joe Biden, has made it a priority of this administration to spend absolutely as much money as possible before leaving office so that those needs are all taken care of, even though Donald Trump received the mandate and intends to and promises to pull all of that spending back. Now, I think that there's obviously more going on behind the scenes with all of this. And so this isn't something I'm terribly worried about. But again, we hear that same signal that these people want to get all this money spent before leaving office. We talked about that last week with Gina Raimundo, and we have talked about it with a number of different regime figures in a number of different departments. And the trend in general, reported in some of these, panicky articles from Politico and the Washington Post and the rest, they're trying to get all that money out. They're trying to get all of the NGOs paid, all their allies in foreign countries paid, whatever other people are facilitating the regime agenda. They got to get all these people paid before the spigot gets shut off by Donald Trump. That is crazy. But let's get some of the reaction. Jake Sullivan had a very measured reaction there to Kash Patel. But let's get some more reaction to Kash Patel. Here is The Storm Has Arrived, giving us some of the MSNBC reaction. And this is a bit long, so I'm probably not going to go through this whole video, but it's always fun to get some of the freak out in.
And number two now, Kash Patel. And Kash Patel, of course, is a person who infamously said he was going to jail reporters and journalists and news people who did not go along with the 2020 election conspiracy theory. It's not even because he's an ideologue. It's because he seems, according to this piece and everything we've seen, singularly focused on exacting revenge on people who did not carry through on Donald Trump's threats of retribution. And again, we will be playing the clip in a minute where he promises to arrest journalists and reporters and news people who refused to go along with the 2020 Stop the Steal conspiracy theories.
Kash Patel, perceived by many to be deeply dangerous because he has indeed, as you note, no qualifications for this job. Many of Trump's former aides said as much 4 years ago. But Patel, I'm told, and I'm talking to people in the orbit the last couple of days, there is no ideology. There's no agenda here other than retribution. Patel's one defining characteristic is that he is simply loyal to Donald Trump.
Kash Patel is not just controversial among media outlets. He's not just controversial among Republican senators. He is controversial inside Trump's own orbit. If somebody threatens the Constitution, if somebody threatens the First Amendment, if somebody threatens the basic Bill of Rights, it does not matter whether you have to say no to one of those or two of those or three of those. The founders did not write that the Senate had the advise and consent power for maybe 1.5 dangerous selections. So got that for as many as you need. And by the way, this is not just uniformly vote no against everybody that Donald Trump puts up. I think everybody agrees that Marco Rubio, though not a Democrat selection, certainly is within the.
All right, we're going to leave Morning Joe alone. Funny mention of Marco Rubio there. Jake Sullivan was referring to Marco Rubio indirectly when he was saying he was pleased with the work that had been done in the transition to the Trump term. Marco Rubio is the nominee for Secretary of State, so you would think that Marco Rubio would be the liaison that he's referring to there. So interesting. This is just an inference, so I'll leave it at that, but interesting nonetheless. I think I had one or two more here. Oh, yes. Yes, let's definitely go here to Adam Shifty Schiff, the watermelon head, as known in Cash's children's book, which Jen Psaki was on MSNBC talking about yesterday. Maybe I'll pull that up just because it's fun. But here's Shifty Schiff.
The president's pardon of Scooter Libby, Congressman, has inspired you to propose new legislation. What exactly would it do?
What it would do is say that in the event the president pardons anyone in an investigation in which the president is a witness, a subject, or the target, those investigative files will all be turned over to the Congress. The Congress ought to know whether the president is using the pardon power to obstruct justice. The American people have a right to know. I think it is clearly constitutional. It doesn't prohibit him from granting a pardon, even a pardon he shouldn't grant. But it does say that we will be able to at least find out whether the president is using this power to shield himself from liability.
It offers transparency at the very least.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate your time.
So Shifty Schiff, hilarious with the pardon power. That was back in 2018. Here he is today. This is Joel Pollack in Breitbart. Adam Schiff demands Senate reject Kash Patel, longtime nemesis, as FBI director. And on X, formerly Twitter, Adam Schiff says Kash Patel has publicly called for arresting members of the media and government officials, and he is willing to do whatever Trump asks, illegal, unethical, or otherwise. More suited as internet troll than FBI director, the Senate must reject him. Says Schiff has been trying to destroy Patel ever since 2017, when Patel helped expose the fact that members of the outgoing Obama administration abused their power to unmask the names of Americans caught on foreign wiretaps, a practice that was thought to have led to the unjust firing and prosecution of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn over false allegations of collusion with Russia. You'll note, by the way, in Elon Musk's post, I showed Justin Trudeau there. Apparently, these are not Logan Act worthy meetings between the quote unquote president-elect and foreign leaders, as he has been doing for years. Schiff, then the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, wrote a memorandum in which he attempted unsuccessfully to counter the claims of the Republican majority that the FBI surveillance of Carter Page, an aide to then candidate Donald Trump, was justified. Schiff's claims were later debunked by a report by the Department of Justice Inspector General, which validated Republican concerns about the abuse of the FISA court by the FBI in its efforts to target Trump. So Schiff and Patel have been going back and forth for many years. We can leave that there. You are more than welcome to read the rest of this article if you like. There it is on the screen. You don't even have to go for the link. You'll just have to pause it, go back 2 seconds, and you can read it right off the screen. Let's leave old Shifty Schiff right there. Kash Patel worked under Devin Nunes at the time. Here is that Psaki video.
Important to really understand how a guy like that arrived at this point. And his journey into Trump world really began on the House Intelligence Committee in many ways, where he worked for Devin Nunes. Remember that guy? We can see him there. Well, Patel started working for him at the height of the Russia investigation, and that work basically revolved around attempting to undercut and discredit that investigation in any way that he could. Kash Patel was so proud of the job he did that he even wrote a children's book about it.
We are living in unparalleled times of corruption in both our media and government. It is our job to expose the truth, no matter what the cost. My name is Kash Patel, and I have written the first ever children's Russiagate book. It's called The Plot Against the King. It is a fantastical telling by me, the Russiagate chief investigator under then Chairman Nunes, of how we triumphed to put truth over evil and report the facts to the American public. Please go to the link below and order your copy today.
The first ever children's Russiagate book, everyone. What a demand. There's still time for holiday shopping, guys. Get out there today.
Love it. That is hilarious. Also, many people who kind of came to my show in the last couple of years, I had Kash Patel on the show twice in 2022. And I don't know if it's possible to find those episodes on the Substack for whatever reason. I'm going to check later today and I'll try to put those episodes up. If not today, I'll get them up very soon because I want people to be able to hear those. Maybe I'll put them up. I'm not going to have a show on Thursday or Friday this week. So maybe I'll put them up in place of those shows as just podcasts. Okay. So what else do I have? Oh, my mistake on this. I should have dropped this in there earlier. This is Donald Trump on the pardon of Hunter. Does the pardon given by Joe to Hunter include the J6 hostages who have now been imprisoned for years? Such an abuse and miscarriage of justice. And so Trump is connecting those things. He has said he will pardon various J6ers when he's back in place as the publicly recognized president of the United States of America. And, you know, as far as the J6ers go, obviously, anyone who is in prison for attending the rally or going into the Capitol and doing nothing more than that, that is a travesty of justice. And there may be people in there for that. To the extent that security forces instigated the violent parts of that riots and Americans got caught up in that, they also should not be in jail. That is not to suggest that there were not actual infiltrators who are in prison, who we see as not infiltrators, who were actually responsible for creating the problem for the rest of those Trump supporters and for Trump supporters broadly because of the very violent insurrection narrative. If those people remain in prison, I'm going to reserve judgment on at least some people in that instance. Okay. But obviously for everybody else, it is a travesty and they should be not only freed, but properly compensated for the fact that they have sat as political prisoners for the last 2 or 3 years. All right. So that is Trump's response there. Trump's statement about Kash Patel when nominating him, and I probably could have just led off with this. I'm proud to announce that Kash Patel will serve as the next director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Kash is a brilliant lawyer, investigator, and America First fighter who has spent his career exposing corruption, defending justice, and protecting the American people. He played a pivotal role in uncovering the Russia hoax, standing as an advocate for truth, accountability, and the Constitution. Kash did an incredible job during my first term, where he served as Chief of Staff at the Department of Justice, Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. Kash has also tried over 60 jury trials. This FBI will end the growing crime epidemic in America, dismantle the migrant criminal gangs, and stop the evil scourge of human and drug trafficking across the border. Kash will work under our great Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to bring back fidelity, bravery, and integrity to the FBI. Oh, to make them an entirely new FBI. Okay. Again, I said that I don't think either of these organizations should exist. I don't know that I'll get my wish there in either case. But to the extent that they do exist, they should at least be led by people who will not abuse the authority vested in those positions and in those offices. And I want people prosecuted for crimes who committed crimes. I don't want to see a federal investigation force, police force, going out in waves across the country to go get everybody. In the cases where crimes against America have been committed, or treason has been committed, or espionage or something similar, that is actually a justifiable cause for a federal enforcement action as recommended by the Constitution, then handle it with military tribunals. Don't handle it with a half-corrupted and infiltrated office of the federal bureaucracy that shouldn't exist in the first place. Okay? That's my perspective on the whole thing. I don't know how that is ultimately going to work out. And I wish that we could get everything we always wanted. I'm not sure that's going to happen. This is from The Atlantic. Come on. What's wrong with something is wrong with my link. David Frum went full freak out over Kash Patel, and I want to share that. He said on the evening of November 30th, Saturday night, in response to the Patel post from Trump, we are headed toward a U.S. constitutional crisis vastly bigger than Watergate. Well, your friends brought down the president during Watergate, so I'm not sure exactly what David Frum means by that. I don't know how Kash Patel is going to cause that constitutional crisis, but we'll allow Frum to tell us. This is in the pages of The Atlantic. I just need to. So sometimes some of these pay sites are reprinted by various organizations, and sometimes you can just break through that paywall with the archive link. I thought I had the one, but I did not. So let's just go to the archive link. Here it is. A Constitutional Crisis Greater Than Watergate by David Frum. And I'm not going to go through all, well, it's not too long. For more than 4 decades before Donald Trump assumed the presidency, the FBI director was a position above politics. Laughable right from the very start. It's literally a global regime police force that operates extra-constitutionally. Unreal. A new president might choose a political ally as attorney general, but the FBI director was different. An FBI director appointed by Richard Nixon also served under Presidents Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. Carter's choice remained on the job deep into Reagan's second term, when Reagan moved him to head the CIA. Reagan's FBI appointee served through the George H.W. Bush presidency and into the Bill Clinton administration. Clinton fired the inherited official, the first time a president ever fired an FBI director, only because the outgoing Bush administration had left behind a Department of Justice report accusing the director of ethical lapses. So the former CIA director, who then became president after subduing Ronald Reagan and essentially operating as Reagan's controller during his term, much as Dick Cheney operated during the son of Bush's term, that CIA director left behind a report accusing that FBI director of ethical lapses so that Bill Clinton could then take out that FBI director. Clinton tried to coax the tainted director into resigning of his own volition. Only after the coaxing failed did Clinton act. What machinations. And you'll remember that George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott Bush, was a Nazi co-conspirator, essentially. David Frum is a neoconservative, a downstream Trotskyite, global communist, militant global communist with expansionist foreign policy. Neoconservatives are downstream from Trotsky. Zionists, of which David Frum is a quite militant one, were the partners of Nazis in the lead up to World War II. Throughout Havara, the transfer agreement that involved the Zionists and Nazis coordinating a for-profit scheme to move European Jews to set up Palestine after confiscating their property. Okay, so it's just good to keep Frum in perspective, despite Frum acting like a very staunch conservative. who is very anti-Nazi, the most anti-Nazi person ever. Everything to David Frum is crystal knocked. And so it continued into the 21st century, except in a single case of serious scandal, Senate-confirmed FBI directors stayed in their post until they quit or until their 10-year term expired. Never, never, never was a Senate-confirmed FBI director fired so that the president could replace him with a loyalist. Republicans and Democrats alike agree that there must be no return to the days when J. Edgar Hoover did special favors for presidents who perpetuated his power. Even Donald Trump grudgingly submitted to this rule during his first term, as the Mueller report later detailed. Trump wanted to fire James Comey to shut down the investigation of Trump's ties to Russia. Trump's advisors convinced Trump that admitting his true motive would spark an enormous scandal. Just fiction, always from Trump. Instead, the new administration unveiled the deputy attorney general to write a letter offering a more neutral-seeming explanation that Comey had mishandled the Bureau's investigation of Hillary Clinton. That deceptive rationalization, the Mueller report authoritatively disproved the cover story, did not calm the uproar over Trump's scheme to install a henchman as FBI director. At the time, even Trump supporters still professed that the FBI director must be more than a presidential yes man. And always it's supported with what Republicans say, even Republicans, even Trump-aligned candidates, even Trump supporters. Even Trump's own administration says. So what? What people around Trump say doesn't matter at all. Things were quieted only when Trump chose a politically independent candidate to replace Comey, Christopher Wray, who holds the job to this day, retained through all 4 years of the Biden administration. So it was okay that Trump wanted to fire Comey because he was going to replace him with an acceptable candidate. Amazing. Yesterday, Trump announced on Truth Social that he intended to fire Wray to replace him with Kash Patel, a person notorious for his cringing deference to Trump's wishes. He didn't say anything about Wray. The implication, of course, is that he would have to fire Wray, but who knows what's going to happen with Chris Wray between now and then. Also, who knows if this was anything more than a Truth Social post to watch all of these people freak out. These nominations could just be magnificent sifters that Donald Trump is deploying at will, because each and every time the right people fall for it and lose their shit. How about a choice as Patel? My colleague, Elena Plott Calabro, who's that, reported that when President Trump entertained naming Patel deputy director of the FBI, Attorney General Bill Barr confronted the White House chief of staff and said, "Over my dead body, blah, blah." But before getting to Patel's demerits, we should stay for a minute longer on the ominous danger of Trump's wish to fire Wray. FBI directors wield awesome powers over the liberties of Americans. What? Why? How? Why do they have such authority? The FBI director wields awesome power over the liberties of Americans? The unwritten rule governing their appointment, no dismissal except for compelling cause, bulwarked American law and freedom for half a century. Even first-term Trump dared not openly defy it, but second-term Trump is opening with a bid to junk it altogether. Much of the reporting on Trump's announcement reveals a society already bending to Trump's will. Something that was regarded as outrageously unacceptable in 2017, treating an FBI director as just another Trump aide, has been semi-normalized even before President-elect Trump takes office. The firing of Wray is the real outrage. The obnoxious nomination of Patel slathers frosting and sprinkles on the outrage. Maybe the Patel nomination will fail, as Trump's attempt to install Matt Gaetz as Attorney General failed. Or it didn't. If Patel falters, maybe Trump will fall back on a somewhat more respectable candidate. That second candidate may be greeted with relief. But the essential harm will be done by the firing of Wray, not the hiring of Patel, or whoever ultimately gets the job. Already not a month since the closest election by popular vote margin in 2 generations, we are witnessing throughout law enforcement and the national security agencies a pattern of Trump's trashing institutions and replacing them with whim. What an idiot. He's such a bad writer who thinks he's such a good writer. David Frum is obviously making the same arguments that were made in the 2016-2017 transition. Trump was a threat to all the institutions. He's bringing that back. But note that he also said the closest election by popular vote margin in 2 generations. What happened to my landslide? What happened to my landslide? Where is my landslide? I was told we had a landslide. I was told the landslide is actually what makes the election legitimate. You can tell the election is legitimate because Donald Trump won in a landslide. People spent all last week saying to me, you can't possibly be saying that the regime allowed Donald Trump to win their greatest threat of all time. You can't be telling me that they allowed him to win that election. Sure, I can. I can definitely be telling you that the regime's choice was to announce on television that Donald Trump won the fake election in a landslide. It was a fake election. And the reason for that is the same logic that I've been laying out for a year now. It was their best case scenario. No one was ever going to believe that first Joe Biden and second Kamala could have ever beaten Donald Trump in a real election. And so rather than exposing the fact that their elections are totally and completely fake, thus disrupting the entire system at once, they would simply announce that Donald Trump won by a little bit and then delegitimize and disqualify him during the transition period and attempt to keep him from office through objections on January 6th, through disqualifications under the 14th Amendment, in whatever capacity. And that's exactly what's happened. And that is exactly what they're attempting to do. And the people's reaction that I suggested, that they would simply accept the legitimacy of the election because of the landslide and then go back to sleep, is exactly what the people are doing. And they're doing it especially because the TV, and especially Con Inc., said this was a great landslide. Oh, we won the House, we won the Senate, we won the popular vote, and we won the Electoral College by such a large margin. Well, actually, it's a totally normal margin, not that big a margin. Winning the popular vote doesn't matter because the numbers are fake and because it's still nowhere near representative of what the American people actually think. We are nowhere near a 50-50 country. So the landslide is now gone. The landslide is gone. The House majority might be gone. Trump is nominating it away. And it's certainly not a MAGA majority regardless. And the same is true of the Senate. So there was no landslide. The system is broken. The Congress and the Senate are illegitimate. Okay? The elections are illegitimate. Trump didn't need to win a real election because he didn't lose last time. And whatever's going on behind the scenes is eventually going to emerge, at least to people with the eyes to see it. And so none of this is actually of concern, but look how it's being used. The landslide is gone because the landslide, in terms of real election results, never existed. And it was never going to exist. If it's possible to predict these things and the narratives that will evolve from them a year early and say, this is the regime's best case scenario, and then it emerges in reality, you should start worrying about what just happened with the election. Now, I don't worry about that because I think that we have developed a pretty solid understanding of it. But the idea that we just had a real election and that we should give our power over to these people and comply with the officials in the states, etc., is crazy. We did not have a real election. We had another fake election. And if that's different in the states for some reason, which I would have a real hard time believing, then that problem needs to be handled in the states. And of course, the problem about elections ultimately does need to be handled in the states. Donald Trump can do a great many things to push that along, but he can't solve the problem. And sooner or later, the people are going to have to accept that our elections are fake, not just rigged, not just stolen, but fake. They're not how leaders in this country have been determined for quite a while, and not how leaders in states have been determined. And sooner or later, people are going to have to get through that process, which is why I wanted the biggest possible hose to hit the most possible people on November 5th. And that didn't happen. And people who are planning this stuff out have more insight to all of that than I do. But the idea that we just had the best result ever and that we all just have to celebrate and clap and grovel forever over J.D. Vance and Trump's nominations is insane. Let's go back to this article. Trump is declaring his intention to reinvent the FBI as something it has never been before, an instrument of personal presidential power, which will investigate or refrain from investigating and lay charges or refrain from laying charges as the president wishes. And yeah, we've never seen that before. He just said above, by the way, that J. Edgar Hoover, let's find this. What did he say exactly? Where is it? Republicans and Democrats alike agreed that there must be no return to the days when J. Edgar Hoover did special favors for presidents who perpetuated his power. And then he says, right here, such a bad writer, honestly. He's so bad. Pardon. Hold for processing. Oh, here we are. Trump is declaring his intention to reinvent the FBI as something that it has never been before, an instrument of personal presidential power. Literally. Contradicting the thing that he just said paragraphs ago. Because everything Trump does is the first time anybody's ever done it. No one has ever dared to violate our norms and standards like this. It's a coup. These people are retarded. For Secretary of Defense, Trump has chosen an ideological crank whose own mother accused him in writing of repeatedly abusing women. Good Lord. She subsequently disavowed the statements. Oh, you mean David Frum might be misrepresenting what Pete Hegseth's mom thinks about Pete Hegseth? It's incredible. It really is incredible. He doesn't care. I'm going to say this thing. I'm going to cast this aspersion, and then I will tell you that the aspersion has been disavowed by the person who originally said these things, and I'm going to cast it anyway. David Frum. Everyone is always guilty. No morals, no principles, no standards whatsoever. One of the most dishonest men in the entire sphere. It is incredible. At the CIA, and by the way, I used to be a fan of his in like 2017, 2018, when I was kind of going through that conversion, figuring out, bouncing back and forth between the controlled opposition, like which of these makes sense? I guess I just have to have these principles like the neocons express, like, oh, it's the Constitution above everything. I'm going to say that all the time, even while lying about it like David Frum does. I'm going to say, oh, we need our institutions and our norms and our standards, because it was clear the Democrats did not adhere to any of that. But it was at least somebody was paying lip service to it. Then you realize actually these people aren't paying lip service to it at all. And the people freaking out about the rest of these people are the ones actually following those principles. Okay. At the CIA, Trump wants a hyper-partisan who, as Trump's first-term director of national intelligence, selectively declassified information to discredit Trump's political opponents. That's not true. That's not why they did it. They did it because the intelligence needed to be declassified. We have an overclassification problem that was being solved throughout Trump's term, and they're going to claim the same thing when JFK files, et cetera, get released. For a second-term director of national intelligence, Trump wants a longtime apologist for Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria and Vladimir Putin's war of aggression in Ukraine. Well, good. Both of those positions are the defensible positions relative to the regime positions that David Frum supports. David Frum should be opposed on foreign policy at every turn. He is a out-and-out global communist who believes in getting involved with the military everywhere that the global regime or the global fiat bankers are being rejected. Merit, competence, integrity, none of that matters, or rather, those good qualities seem to be active disqualifiers. Trump's picks are selected for obedience only. Okay, so that's the news story. It's just everyone obeying Trump. Now comes the great test. Is the American constitutional system as fragile as Trump hopes? Will Wray meekly accept termination, Or will he defend the Bureau from Trump's second and bolder attempt to pervert it? What does that even mean? What does that mean? How is he going to stay in power based on some norm of the Department of Justice? Donald Trump is the plenary authority in the executive branch. And good, let's take it all the way to the Supreme Court. David Frum wants to spark this battle up. Bring it on. In every one of these scenarios, bring it on. Let's get the decision. Let's have everybody understand the issue in full so that they can know exactly how things are supposed to be. Will Senate Republicans ratify Trump's attack on the separation of law enforcement from politics? There has never been a separation. Pretending there is a separation is the problem. We went through the independence of these different agencies last week. There is no independence. There's none. Doesn't matter what the statutes say. There's no independence. Donald Trump is the plenary authority of the executive branch, period. And he is elected to be that, to the extent presidents are elected. Will federal courts grant warrants to an FBI that seeks warrants and makes arrests because the president told it to? Great. Invalidate the federal courts as well. I'm fine with all of this. Invalidate all your institutions, David Frum, that you hold so dear. Let's see how it goes. Put it all to the test. Trump versus your institutions. Let's see where the American people side. Let's see where the Constitution sides. More power to you. Will the tiny Republican majority in the House endorse or resist Trump's attempt to create a personal police force? Well, I don't know how they will do that, how they would resist that, since it's not really their business, but we can allow them to try. I mean, they are the Article 1 branch. They're not legitimate, unfortunately, right now, but, you know, they are the people, they are the part of government closest to the people and should be trusted to do certain things. Maybe they're talking about an impeachment attempt. I don't know. Does enough of an independent press survive outside the control of Trump-friendly oligarchs to explain what is happening and why it matters? That's an interesting question. Of course, he's talking about Elon Musk, and he's saying, does the press survive outside the control? What does he mean by control? Does he mean that Elon Musk, as the face of Twitter, would have the ability to suppress that press at the behest of the regime? I think that has to be what he means, which is an admission of the fact that they had that ability before. And of course, it was used for exactly that before. David Frum is trying to reverse the meaning there. This is an inversion, and all good. Let's go. Paint the lines on the field. Tell us what the rules are. We will play anytime, anywhere, and win. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm not worried about where the people will come down. Let's have the issues, present them to the American public, get them all decided. Will enough of the public care? Will enough of the public react? Well, no, David. No, in both cases, obviously, because this is what they elected Donald Trump to do. This is where the public mandate comes from. Things exactly like this. This is the point. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm sorry. Apologies. The American people voted for cheaper eggs. They're going to get only noise, conflict, and chaos. What Trump is trying will, if successful, be a constitutional scandal far greater than Watergate. If he succeeds, the seizure of power he unsuccessfully attempted in 2021 could be underway in 2025. So the man with the public mandate, who was just, quote unquote, elected for a third time, is going to seize power. Trump tried to remain in power in 2021 through a coup, we are told, by David Frum. And now that Trump has been reelected to power with a sweeping public mandate, he is going to stage a coup? What are these people ever talking about? What could that possibly mean? It doesn't mean anything. And again, we're getting the story about how Americans voted for cheaper eggs, and they were upset. They just didn't think Biden was up to the job. Kamala Harris didn't campaign for long enough. The entirety of the public mandate is only due to cheaper eggs. The American people were too dumb to understand that Joe Biden actually fixed inflation. He didn't cause it. And so they voted for cheaper eggs, not for Trump to do all of these things. Well, sorry, David. They voted for Trump to do all of these things. He is now showing the country that he will do all these things. There's much to still happen in these remaining 50 days. So who knows how that will go. But as of right now, this is what it is. He is doing these things. He is showing us he is going to do these things. Will Kash Patel still be the candidate for this position in 50 days? Who knows? Maybe the DOJ and the FBI just don't exist by that time. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just saying we are in a very, very murky situation that is on many levels unpredictable. So to take Trump's statement, Kash Patel is going to be FBI director, and then immediately project through those 50 days and say, Kash Patel is going to do this, and he's going to do this, and he's going to do this. Let's like take it one step at a time here. Okay. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I love Kash Patel. He's been great at explaining what's been happening over these last few years. Not the full story, unfortunately, but laying down a whole trail of crumbs for people to go and investigate and follow. Seems like a great guy. I was very happy to have him on my show twice. I think he's probably going to do an excellent job as FBI director, and I hope that the extent of that job is exposing what the FBI has been for all of this time and guiding its dismantling. But it could be other things. And again, if we're going to be doomed to have these agencies around for a while longer, I guess it's good that the America First agenda and the MAGA agenda are being implemented and those agencies are being cleaned out. We can hope for the best, but we should still be focused on what the ideal is. And without any knock against Kash Patel whatsoever, the ideal is no DOJ, no FBI. Let the states handle criminal law. If something needs to be adjudicated between the states, there are other ways to do that beyond setting up criminal law enforcement agencies. And there are a bunch of them, by the way. Let me see if I can just pull up one more thing before we sign off for the day. I was looking through some of the DOJ's information yesterday on their site about like what their purpose is. And they have, let's look at this PDF on doj.gov. It's kind of an organizational structure here. Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, Associate Attorney Generals, Solicitor General, and the Office of Solicitor Generals. Then they have the policy offices. They have the Civil Division under the Associate AG. They have the Civil Division, the Civil Rights Division, the Antitrust Division, the Environment and Natural Resources Division, the Tax Division, the Community Relations Division. Under the, they also have, the Office of Justice Programs, Community-Oriented Policing Services, Executive Office for U.S. Trustees, the Office of Information Policy, the Office of Violence Against Women. That's Joe Biden, I think, by the way, who set that up. The Foreign Claims Settlement Commission. It's crazy. Office of Legal Policy, Office of Public Affairs, Office of Legislative Affairs, Office of Legal Counsel, Office of Tribal Justice. Then the FBI, the Criminal Division, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, the Bureau of Prisons, the Executive Office for the United States Attorneys, the U.S. Marshal Service, U.S. Attorneys, Interpol Washington, so an international police force, the ATF, the National Security Division, the Office of Professional Responsibility, the Office of Inspector General, the Office of the Pardon Attorney, Justice Management Division, U.S. Parole Commission, Executive Office for Immigration Review, Executive Office for Organized Crime, Drug Enforcement Task Forces, and the Professional Responsibility Advisory Office. That is exhausting. Look at how big the DOJ is. That's nuts, man. That is way too much. Okay. And with that, I was going to talk the threats of the Senate, the threats to the Senate's independence as outlined by the New York Times, but we will save that for tomorrow. I'm going to check the chat one last time. And I believe we've hit all the Rumble rants. And so with that, I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. Don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
Ah!
You down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What must be what?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.